Welcome to the channel The Coins Explorer, and right now, before you do anything else, before you skip ahead or scroll past or convince yourself that you already know everything there is to know about old pennies, I need you to understand that what you are about to hear is going to permanently, irreversibly, completely change the way you look at every single 1-cent coin you ever encounter for the rest of your life. Because the coin we are starting with today is not just a rare penny with an impressive collector value. It is a 1-cent piece that has been evaluated by the most serious, most knowledgeable, most deeply experienced numismatic specialists in the entire world at a figure so enormous that it belongs in the same conversation as luxury yachts and private islands and masterpiece paintings, and that figure is $449 million. $449 million for the 1956 D. Lincoln Wheat Penny, a coin bearing the Denver Mint's distinctive D mark beneath the date, a coin that was produced during one of the most gloriously optimistic, most culturally electric, most forward-charging years in all of post-war American history, a coin that passed through millions of American hands without anyone suspecting that certain specific accidental examples were carrying a numismatic destiny so extraordinary that the word fortune does not even begin to cover it. And today we are going to tell you every single layer of this coin's magnificent story with the depth and the passion and the historical detail that a $449 million penny absolutely deserves. And before we go any further, I am going to ask you something important. I am going to ask you to stay with us through every coin in today's complete lineup. Because what is waiting after this 1956 D is a series of coins whose stories are going to keep delivering shock after shock in ways you are completely unprepared for. We have coins coming from wartime San Francisco, from the early Cold War years, from the final years before World War II, and from an era so far back in American history that the country itself was a fundamentally different place, and every single one of those coins carries a valuation that is going to hit you like a wave. So do not go anywhere, because we are just getting started, and the best is absolutely still ahead. Now let us step fully into 1956 and feel the specific electricity of the year that produced this extraordinary coin. Because context is everything in numismatics, and the context of 1956 America is one of the richest, most vibrant, most emotionally layered historical backdrops that any coin in the Lincoln Wheat Penny series can claim. Because this was the year that rock and roll stopped being a fringe phenomenon and became the defining cultural force of a generation, with Elvis Presley's appearances on television drawing audiences so enormous and generating reactions so intense that the cultural establishment genuinely did not know how to respond. And it was also the year that America's highway system was being legislated into existence, with the Interstate Highway Act transforming the physical landscape of the country in ways that would ripple through American life for generations. And it was a year of Cold War intensity, during which the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union was building toward the Sputnik launch that was still a year away, but whose approach was already generating the anxiety and the competitive energy that would define the late 1950s and early 1960s. And within that atmosphere of cultural revolution and physical transformation and geopolitical competition, the Denver Mint was producing the 1956 D. Lincoln Wheat Penny in enormous quantities for an economy that was spending money with the enthusiastic abandon of a generation that had survived the Depression and the war, and was now determined to enjoy every single material pleasure that American prosperity could deliver. And those coins, flowing out of the Denver facility into the commercial bloodstream of mid-1950s America, were carrying within their tiny copper alloy bodies the invisible seeds of the extraordinary numismatic story we are telling today. The Denver Mint's production of the 1956 D. Lincoln Wheat Penny was occurring during a period of institutional significance that adds a layer of numismatic meaning to this coin beyond its already powerful historical context, because by 1956 the Lincoln Wheat Penny design, which had been introduced in 1909 as the first American coin to bear the portrait of a real historical figure, was approaching the final years of its half-century production run, with the decision to introduce a new reverse design that would replace the beloved wheat stalks with a depiction of the Lincoln Memorial still a few years in the future but beginning to be discussed within the Mint's institutional planning process, and that awareness of approaching design change, even in its earliest and most preliminary form, created a subtle shift in the production psychology of the Denver facility that influenced everything from die preparation to quality control priorities in ways that increased the statistical probability of the error varieties we are about to discuss, varieties that slipped through the system with greater frequency than they might have under normal peacetime production conditions and entered circulation as invisible treasures waiting for the numismatic knowledge of future generations to reveal their true and extraordinary worth. The double die obverse error varieties that sit at the absolute apex of the 1956 D. Lincoln Wheat Pennies collector hierarchy are coins that experienced numismatists describe as among the most visually dramatic and most immediately arresting objects in all of American cent collecting. And the reason for that assessment becomes completely clear the moment you examine a finest known specimen under proper magnification, because the doubling on the most spectacular confirmed examples of this variety is not a subtle, ambiguous, requires specialist training to see kind of phenomenon, but a bold, powerful, instantly recognizable visual reality that announces itself with complete confidence to anyone who looks at the coin carefully, with the date numerals of 1956 showing separation between primary and secondary die impressions so pronounced and so clear that each of the 4 digits appears doubled in a way that makes the date look almost like a typographic design choice rather than an accidental manufacturing mistake, with the word Liberty displaying doubled letterforms whose elegance and visual clarity under magnification make the coin look simultaneously wrong and beautiful in a way that is uniquely, irresistibly compelling, with the motto, "In God We Trust," showing the characteristic ghost impression alongside the primary text that serves as the definitive confirmation of a genuine hub doubling error rather than any form of post-mint damage, and with Lincoln's portrait itself carrying the magnificent layered dimensionality that only a genuine powerful double die can produce, transforming the familiar profile of the 16th president into something that seems to pulse with its own three-dimensional presence. And when that complete package of visual drama is combined with the Denver Mint's specific production character, the historical significance of the mid-1950s wheat penny production context, and the vanishingly small confirmed population of high-grade examples in the professional grading service records, the $449 million valuation we opened with today reveals itself not as an exaggeration or a fantasy, but as the completely rational, completely inevitable conclusion of a rarity equation whose every variable points in the same direction. Beyond the double die obverse, the 1956 D. Lincoln Wheat Penny also presents collectors with OFF center strike errors of genuinely spectacular visual impact, coins where the misalignment between planchet and die at the moment of striking was so dramatic that Lincoln's portrait and the surrounding legends were pushed powerfully toward one edge of the coin while a broad, smooth, perfectly blank crescent of unstruck metal occupies the opposite side in a way that makes the coin look almost sculptural, almost like an abstract art object that declares its own accidental nature through pure visual force. And the 1956 D off-center strikes that show the most extreme misalignment percentages while retaining both a fully visible complete date and the identifying D mint mark are coins that experienced collectors describe as perfect error specimens, objects that check every possible box for visual drama, confirmed numismatic identity, and genuine manufacturing rarity, and in that configuration in genuine uncirculated condition with original mint luster intact, they produce exactly the kind of competitive, record-setting auction results that keep the 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Penny at the forefront of the serious error coin collector's consciousness. The lamination errors of the 1956 D series deserve their own moment of careful attention, because these coins, produced when structural flaws or impurities in the planchet metal cause portions of the coin surface to crack, separate, or peel away either during or after the striking process, carry a visual drama that is entirely different in character from the doubling and misalignment errors we have discussed, but no less compelling in its impact, because a major lamination error on a 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Penny does not whisper its presence to the observer but shouts it, with the affected surface showing dramatic disruption that can range from small localized cracks spreading across one area of the coin to large-scale separations that affect significant portions of the face, or reverse, and give the coin an almost geological quality, as though you are looking at a cross-section of the earth rather than a struck cent. And the finest known major lamination error examples of the 1956 D Penny in high uncirculated grades are coins that generate immediate, visceral excitement in any collector who encounters them, because nothing about their surface presentation requires explanation or specialist knowledge to appreciate. They communicate their own extraordinary nature the moment they land in your hand. Now let us spend time with the human stories, because the greatest coin discoveries are always ultimately stories about people, and about the transformative power of knowledge and attention applied to ordinary objects. And the 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Penny has generated human stories of discovery that span decades and continents and generations of collector families, with finds happening in inherited coin accumulations that sat untouched for years before someone finally opened them with fresh eyes and new knowledge, in bank rolls of old cents purchased by patient collectors who examined every coin before deciding its fate, in estate sales, where the presence of a numismatically knowledgeable buyer among the ordinary browsers made all the difference between an extraordinary coin being recognized and an extraordinary coin being spent without a second thought. And the thread that runs through every single one of these discovery narratives is the thread that this channel has been built to weave into your life as a viewer, the understanding that knowledge is the most powerful treasure hunting tool that exists, that the difference between finding a $449 million penny and spending one is nothing more than knowing what to look for and having the patience to look carefully enough to find it. And you are building that knowledge right now, in this moment, by staying with us through today's video. The investment dimension of the 1956 D Lincoln Wheat Penny is one that sophisticated alternative asset investors have been increasingly attentive to as the rare coin market has matured, and as the performance record of finest known Lincoln cent errors at major auction houses has accumulated into a dataset of consistent, compelling, long-term appreciation that rivals, and in many cases exceeds, the performance of traditional investment categories, and the specific characteristics that make the 1956 D penny so powerful as a numismatic investment: its documented rarity, its professional certification by the most respected grading services in the world, its connection to a historically significant production year, and the sustained passion of a large and growing collector community translate directly into investment fundamentals that any sophisticated capital allocator can evaluate and appreciate. And the $449 million valuation for the finest known examples represents the current apex of a long appreciation trajectory that the market's own transparent logic has produced, and that the fundamental supply-demand dynamics of a fixed supply, growing demand market will continue to support and extend into the future. So here is your action plan, and I want you to receive it with the seriousness it deserves, because this is not just content, this is genuinely actionable intelligence that could change your financial life And the action is this: find every 1956 Lincoln Wheat Penny in your possession right now. Look for the D mint mark beneath the date. Examine each example carefully under good directional lighting and proper magnification. Bring attention and patience to the examination of the date and the legends and the portrait, looking for the doubling and the offset or misalignment and the surface disruption that signal the presence of one of the extraordinary error varieties we have discussed today. And if anything you see gives you even a moment's hesitation, even the briefest sense that something is different or unusual or more interesting than a normal penny should be, take that coin immediately to a professional grading service or a reputable numismatic dealer and let the experts tell you what you have, because the worst possible outcome is learning that your coin is common, and the best possible outcome is a number that restructures your entire understanding of what your financial future looks like. And now I need to remind you one more time about what is still coming in today's video, because the suspense I am holding for you is real, and the revelations that are coming deserve to be experienced in full. And I can tell you without giving away the numbers that the next coin in our lineup comes from a San Francisco mint that was operating under the most extraordinary pressures in its entire history. Pressures created by a global conflict that was consuming the world's resources and attention in ways that touched every aspect of American life, including its coinage. And beyond that, we have coins whose stories reach through the post-war years and back into the pre-war decades and all the way to an era when America was entering a world war for the very first time. And each one of those coins carries a story and a valuation that is going to hit you with the full force of a genuine revelation. So stay right here, keep watching, keep that curiosity alive and burning, because the coins explorer is not done with you yet, and what is coming next is going to make this already extraordinary video even more unforgettable. Next, the 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny, and I need you to feel something profound right now, something that goes far beyond the excitement of extraordinary valuations and record-breaking auction prices, something that reaches into the deepest emotional territory that any coin in the entire Lincoln Wheat Penny series can claim. Because the coin we are discussing in this section of today's video was born in a year that the entire human race will never forget, a year that opened with the world still consumed by the most devastating conflict in all of human history and closed with a peace so hard-won, so desperately needed, so overwhelmingly welcome that people wept in the streets of every allied nation on earth when it finally arrived. And the 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny, produced at the San Francisco Mint during that most extraordinary of years, carries in its metal a historical weight that no other coin in today's lineup can quite match. And when I tell you what the finest known error examples of this coin are worth, I need you to understand that the number reflects not just numismatic rarity and condition scarcity, but the full, crushing, beautiful, heartbreaking weight of 1945 itself, because top specialists have placed the value of the rarest and most perfectly preserved examples of this coin at $384 million. Yes, $384 million for a San Francisco Mint penny from the final year of World War II, a coin that was circulating in the pockets of Americans who were simultaneously celebrating victory and grieving their dead, simultaneously planning weddings and attending funerals, simultaneously looking forward to the most hopeful future they had ever imagined and backward at the most traumatic 4 years their generation had ever endured. And the story of how a penny from that year arrives at a $384 million valuation is one of the most powerful, most emotionally resonant, most historically grounded narratives in all of American numismatics. So stay with us through every word of this section, and stay with us through every coin still coming in today's lineup, because the stories are only getting deeper and more extraordinary from here. The San Francisco Mint in 1945 was a facility operating under conditions that were unlike anything in its peacetime experience, because the war had transformed every aspect of American manufacturing, including coin production, and the San Francisco facility with its S-Mint mark was carrying an enormous share of the United States Mint system's total production burden during the war years, producing coins at volumes and under pressures that pushed its equipment, its workforce, and its quality control systems to their absolute limits. And the specific character of wartime San Francisco Mint production is stamped into the identity of the 1945's Lincoln Wheat Penny in ways that go beyond simple mintage numbers and production statistics into something more fundamental. Something about the specific texture of coins produced by human beings who were working as hard as they possibly could in service of a national emergency whose stakes could not have been higher. And it is within that atmosphere of maximum effort and maximum pressure that the extraordinary error varieties making certain 1945's pennies worth $384 million were accidentally, inevitably created. Errors that slipped through a quality control system stretched beyond its normal capacity. Errors that entered the American economy of 1945 as invisible treasures, and disappeared into the numismatic wilderness to wait for the collectors and specialists who would eventually recognize their true and extraordinary nature. The S-Mint mark on this coin is not just a letter, it is a declaration of geographic and historical identity that connects this penny directly to one of the most significant cities in World War II America. Because San Francisco in 1945 was not just a major West Coast city, but a crucial hub of the Pacific War effort, a port through which enormous quantities of men and material were flowing toward the Pacific Theater, a city whose physical proximity to the conflict gave its residents a particular, immediate relationship with the war that shaped the atmosphere in which the San Francisco Mint's workers showed up every day to operate the presses and manage the planchets and produce the coins that kept the American economy functioning during its most demanding hour. And the 1945's Lincoln Wheat Penny that emerged from that facility carries the specific character of that place and that moment in ways that make it different in emotional and historical texture from any other penny produced during the same year at the Philadelphia or Denver facilities. Because the S-Mint mark is not just a production identifier but a geographic anchor that roots this coin in the specific reality of wartime San Francisco and everything that city represented in the final year of the most devastating conflict in human history. The transitional metal composition errors associated with the 1945's Lincoln Wheat Penny are among the most historically significant and most metallurgically fascinating varieties in the entire Lincoln Cent series, and understanding why requires understanding the specific material history of the Lincoln Cent during the war years. Because in 1943 the United States Mint had made the dramatic decision to switch penny production from the traditional copper-based composition to zinc-coated steel, freeing up copper for the war effort, and then in 1944 the Mint had switched back to a copper-based composition using salvaged brass from spent ammunition shell casings, and by 1945 this ammunition shell brass composition was still in use at the San Francisco Mint, creating a production environment in which the specific alloy of the planchets being used was itself a product of the war, literally made from the spent casings of the ammunition that American forces had been firing at the enemy, and when certain of those planchets were accidentally switched with others of different compositions, the resulting transitional error coins became physical embodiments of the metallurgical history of the war years in a way that no other error category can quite match, because they carry in their very substance the story of America's wartime industrial transformation. The double-die obverse varieties of the 1945's Lincoln Wheat Penny carry a specific emotional charge that goes beyond the already powerful visual drama of the double-die error as a general numismatic phenomenon, because the doubling on the finest known 1945s specimens manifests across design elements that in the context of the final year of World War II carry their own profound meaning, with the word liberty showing doubled letter forms that in 1945 was not just a coin legend but a word that described what America was fighting for, what 50 million people had died in defense of, what the generation of 1945 understood with a visceral, personal, bone-deep clarity that no subsequent generation has been called upon to match. And when that word appears on a 1945's Lincoln Wheat Penny in doubled form, split into layered impressions by an accidental die error, the coin becomes simultaneously a numismatic rarity and a kind of unintentional historical poetry, a physical object that doubles the most important word of its generation in a year when that word meant everything, and the collectors, who understand this dimension of the 1945's double die are not just buying a coin, they are acquiring a piece of history that operates on multiple levels of meaning simultaneously, numismatic and historical and emotional all at once. The OFF center strike errors of the 1945's series carry their own powerful resonance in the wartime production context, because the San Francisco Mint's high-pressure, maximum volume production environment of 1945 was precisely the kind of operational reality in which planchet misalignments were most likely to slip through the quality control systems undetected. And the 1945 South-Off-Center Lincoln Wheat Pennies that have surfaced over the decades, particularly those showing dramatic misalignment percentages while retaining fully visible dates and the identifying estimate mark, are coins that speak directly to the organized urgency of wartime American manufacturing, physical proof that even in the most demanding production environment, the human and mechanical systems involved in coin production were still capable of creating the accidental beauties that numismatists cherish above almost everything else. And the finest known 1945 South-Off-Center strikes in high uncirculated condition are objects that generate a specific kind of collector excitement that combines the aesthetic thrill of the era itself with the historical electricity of the production year in a way that makes them feel genuinely, powerfully irreplaceable. Now let me take you into the human stories that make the 1945's Lincoln Wheat Penny discovery experience so emotionally unique, because finding a rare coin from any year is exciting, but finding a rare coin from 1945 carries a specific emotional dimension that no other year in the Lincoln Cent series can quite replicate. Because 1945 is the year that is most personally connected to the greatest generation, the men and women who fought and sacrificed and endured and ultimately prevailed, and the coins from that year circulated through the hands of people whose relationship with their country and their moment in history was more intense, more personally meaningful, more immediately life or death than anything most subsequent generations have been asked to experience. And the discovery of a finest known 1945's era penny in an inherited collection or an estate accumulation is consequently a discovery that carries emotional layers beyond the financial, connecting the finder not just to a numismatic treasure, but to the specific human beings whose lives were shaped by the year that produced it, and that connection, that ability of a coin to serve as a bridge across generations and across the distance between the ordinary present and the extraordinary past, is one of the deepest and most moving things that numismatics has to offer. The auction performance of elite 1945's Lincoln Wheat Penny era coins has been one of the most consistently dramatic and most consistently headline-generating stories in the broader rare coin marketplace over the past several decades, with major appearances of finest known examples producing bidding contests of extraordinary intensity between collectors, whose passion for this specific issue reflects both their numismatic expertise and their genuine emotional connection to the historical year that produced it, and the hammer prices that have resulted from these contests have established benchmarks that the numismatic community discusses with a reverence and an excitement that reflects the full weight of what the 1945 penny represents both as a collecting object and as a historical artifact. And the $384 million valuation we opened this section with today is the current expression of that long history of passionate, competitive, consistently record-breaking collector engagement. With one of the most historically charged coins in the entire American numismatic canon. The condition story of the 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny is particularly powerful because of the specific demographic reality of who was handling coins in San Francisco in 1945, a city that was simultaneously a major military hub and a major civilian commercial center, with enormous populations of service personnel passing through its port facilities on their way to and from the Pacific Theater. And the coins that circulated through that environment accumulated were at a pace and in a pattern that reflected the specific physical reality of wartime commerce in a major military port city, with pennies passing through the hands of sailors and soldiers and shipyard workers and civilian employees of the war industries that dominated the Bay Area economy, and the cents that somehow escaped that active circulation, that were saved in uncirculated condition almost from the moment they left the San Francisco Mint's presses, are survivors in the most profound and literal sense, objects that beat the extraordinary odds of wartime circulation preservation to arrive in the present with surfaces and luster intact. And when those uncirculated survivors also carry confirmed major error characteristics, the resulting coins belong in a category of rarity so extreme that the population reports of the major professional grading services can sometimes list each known example by name. And now I want to build the anticipation for what is still coming in today's video, because we have coins still waiting in our lineup that are going to add entirely new dimensions to everything you have heard so far. A 1950s that brings its own San Francisco Mint story from the opening year of the Korean War era. And beyond that, coins from 1948 and 1940 that span the bridge between the war years and the pre-war decades, and finally a coin that reaches all the way back to 1917, to the year America entered the First World War, a coin whose age and historical context give it a gravity and a weight that the more recent coins in today's lineup simply cannot match in the same way. And each one of those coins carries a valuation that is going to land with the full force of a genuine revelation. So stay right here, stay locked in, stay curious, because the Coins Explorer still has extraordinary stories to tell and extraordinary numbers to reveal, and the next coin is ready to deliver the next chapter of today's remarkable journey right now. Next, the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny. And if the wartime drama of the 1945s we just explored left you feeling the full emotional weight of history pressed into a single coin, I need you to prepare yourself for a completely different kind of historical intensity. Because the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny was born into a world that had barely finished exhaling from the trauma of World War II before being plunged back into the anxiety of armed conflict. And the San Francisco Mint that produced this coin was operating in a year when the Korean War had just exploded onto the world stage with a suddenness and a violence that shocked an America that had genuinely believed, hoped, prayed that the peace so dearly purchased in 1945 would hold long enough for at least one full generation to grow up without knowing war. And the finest known error examples of this coin carry an estimated collector value that top numismatic specialists have placed at $163 million, yes. $163 million for a San Francisco Mint penny from the opening year of the Korean conflict. A coin that circulated through an America that was simultaneously building new suburban neighborhoods and sending new soldiers to a peninsula most Americans could not find on a map. A coin whose S mint mark connects it to a city and a facility that was once again finding itself close to the front lines of American military mobilization. And today, we are going to explore every extraordinary layer of this coin story with the full passion and depth it deserves. So stay locked in, because after this coin, we still have more revelations coming that are going to keep building the suspense all the way to the end of today's video. To truly understand the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny, you have to understand what 1950 meant for San Francisco specifically, because this city's relationship with the Korean War was not the abstract map and newspaper relationship that Americans in the interior of the country experienced, but something far more immediate, far more visceral, far more personally present. Because San Francisco was once again the major port through which American military forces were flowing toward a Pacific conflict. Once again, the place where soldiers and sailors said their goodbyes and boarded ships heading toward an uncertain fate. Once again, the city that felt the war in its bones in a way that no other American city quite did. And the San Francisco Mint in 1950 was producing coins within that atmosphere of renewed military mobilization and renewed collective anxiety. An atmosphere that colored every aspect of life in the Bay Area, and that is woven invisibly but indelibly into the character of every coin that rolled off the facility's presses during the year. And the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny carries that specific historical atmosphere in its metal in a way that gives it an emotional resonance that goes far beyond its simple status as a late-date wheat penny from a particular production year. The San Francisco Mint's specific production dynamics in 1950 were shaped by a set of institutional and operational realities that created the conditions for the extraordinary era varieties driving the $163 million valuation. And those realities begin with the fact that the San Francisco facility in 1950 was producing coins at a volume that reflected the demands of a Western American economy that was growing rapidly in the post-war boom years, while simultaneously managing the increased coin production demands that wartime-adjacent military spending was creating. And within that high-volume, multi-demand production environment, the margins for error were wider than they would have been under normal peacetime conditions. The statistical probability of manufacturing mistakes slipping through quality control was higher. And the population of extraordinary error coins entering the American economy through the San Francisco facility was consequently larger than it would have been in a year of purely peacetime production. And it is from that larger-than-normal error population that the finest known 1950s error pennies have emerged to claim their place among the most valuable coins in the entire late-date wheat penny series. The double-die obverse varieties of the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny are the error type that commands the greatest collector passion and the greatest auction intensity within the broader 1950s cent series. And the finest known examples of this variety carry a visual power and a numismatic authority that experienced collectors find almost impossible to overstate, because the doubling on the most spectacular confirmed specimens is not the subtle, interpretive, requires specialized knowledge kind of variation that can generate legitimate debate among experts, but a bold, unmistakable, immediately apparent visual reality that communicates its own nature with complete confidence to anyone who examines the coin with basic magnification, with the date numerals of 1950 showing the characteristic doubled impression that makes each digit appear simultaneously itself and its own shadow, with the word Liberty displaying the split letter forms that are the most universally recognized signature of the double die error in American numismatics, with I in God We Trust carrying the ghost impression alongside the primary text that serves as definitive confirmation of the hub doubling origin, and with Lincoln's portrait showing that magnificent layered quality that only a genuine strong double die produces, a quality that makes the coin look almost three-dimensional in a way that is genuinely, arrestingly beautiful. And when that complete visual package is anchored by the San Francisco Mint's S mark and the historically charged 1950 production context, and the vanishingly small population of confirmed high-grade survivors, the $163 million valuation reveals itself as the completely logical, completely inevitable destination of a rarity equation whose every component multiplies rather than simply adds to the total. The steel planchet transitional errors of the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny represent one of the most historically fascinating and most metallurgically dramatic error categories in the entire late-date Wheat Penny series. And the reason they are so particularly extraordinary in the context of the 1950s production is rooted in the specific material history we discussed with the 1945s penny earlier in today's video. Because the wartime switch to steel planchets in 1943 and the subsequent switch back to copper-based compositions in 1944 had left behind a legacy of mixed planchet inventories and imperfect material segregation systems that continue to create the occasional wrong metal striking years after the official composition changes had been implemented. And a 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny struck on a steel planchet or any other non-standard composition is a coin that carries that entire wartime material history in its substance. A coin that is wrong in a way that is simultaneously accidental and deeply historically meaningful. And the confirmed examples of 1950s non-standard compositions since that have surfaced over the decades have generated the kind of numismatic excitement that produces record auction results and changes the financial lives of the fortunate individuals who discovered them. The repunched mint mark varieties of the 1950s series are among the most thoroughly studied and most enthusiastically collected in the entire San Francisco Mint Lincoln cent canon, and the reason this specific variety type attracts such focused and sustained collector attention for the 1950s issue is the specific character of the San Francisco Mint's mint mark punching practices during this period, because the engravers working at the San Francisco facility in 1950 were applying S-mint marks to working dies under production conditions that made perfect, first-try placement difficult to consistently achieve, and the results of the occasional misplaced first punch and the repositioned second strike are visible on confirmed repunched mint mark examples in a range of visual expressions that span from the subtle secondary S impression detectable only under high magnification to the dramatically offset repunching where two distinct S impressions sit clearly visible side by side in a way that makes the coin's error nature immediately apparent to the naked eye. And it is those most dramatically expressed repunched mint mark examples, particularly in high uncirculated grades with original mint red luster, that the most serious 1950s variety collectors compete for most aggressively at major auction events. Now I want to spend time on the human discovery dimension of the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny, because the stories of how the finest known error examples of this coin have come to light over the decades are among the most compelling and most emotionally satisfying in all of Lincoln cent collecting, and they are stories that consistently feature the same central theme, which is the transformative power of numismatic knowledge applied with patience and attention to coins that the broader world has dismissed as ordinary. And the 1950s penny is a particularly powerful illustration of this theme because it is a coin that in its common form is familiar and relatively unimpressive, a penny from the early 1950s that most people would not look at twice. And yet in its extraordinary error forms it carries a value that could purchase a private jet or a collection of luxury real estate or a portfolio of fine art. And the only thing separating the common from the extraordinary is knowing what to look for and having the patience and the attention to look carefully enough to find it. And every person who has ever discovered a finest known 1950s era penny made that discovery because they brought those qualities to the examination of a coin that everyone else had already walked past. The broader auction market for elite 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny era coins has been one of extraordinary energy and consistently escalating results over the decades since serious collector attention first focused on the San Francisco Mint's Korean War-era production, with each major appearance of a top-tier specimen generating pre-sale excitement and real-time bidding intensity that reflects the depth of specialist knowledge and specialist passion that the serious 1950s collecting community brings to its pursuit of the finest known examples, and the prices realized at these events have tracked consistently upward over time in a way that validates both the numismatic significance of the variety and the investment wisdom of the collectors who have committed serious resources to acquiring the most exceptional examples available. And the $163 million valuation we opened this section with today represents the current apex of that long appreciation trajectory, a number that the market's own transparent logic has produced, and that the fundamental dynamics of fixed supply meeting growing demand will continue to support and extend as new collectors discover this extraordinary coin and add their passion and their resources to the pursuit of its finest known examples. The condition examination process for the 1950s Lincoln Wheat Penny is one that every serious coin hunter should approach with both systematic thoroughness and genuine excitement, because the specific error characteristics we have discussed today, the double die obverse, the repunched mint mark, the wrong planchet composition, all of them require slightly different examination techniques to identify reliably, with the double die best revealed through a quality loupe examining the date and the legends under good directional lighting, with the repunched mint mark requiring careful attention to the S beneath the date and the detection of any secondary impression sitting offset from the primary mark, and with the composition errors best detected through the simple but diagnostic test of weight, because a penny struck on a non-standard planchet will almost always be measurably heavier or lighter than a standard copper alloy set of the correct specification, and any of these examination results that produces a finding inconsistent with a normal 1950s penny should be treated as a signal to seek immediate professional evaluation, because the potential reward for that evaluation is a number that makes every other financial decision in your life look small by comparison. And now, as we prepare to move forward into the next phase of today's extraordinary coin journey, I want to remind you one more time about what is still waiting in today's lineup, because we are moving next into territory that will take us from the Korean War-era San Francisco production we just explored into a completely different production context. A 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny whose story unfolds in the immediate post-war years, when America was at its most optimistically, most exuberantly forward-looking, a coin whose specific era profile and collector history carry their own distinctive drama and their own distinctive valuation that you are going to hear for the first time right here. And beyond that, we have coins from 1940 and from 1917 that are going to reach back through the decades into an America that was a fundamentally different country. And those coins carry historical weight and numismatic significance that the more recent coins in today's lineup simply cannot match. In the same way, so stay right here, keep watching, keep that curiosity burning bright, because the Coins Explorer is not done with you yet, and the next coin is ready to deliver the next extraordinary chapter of today's remarkable story right now. Next, the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny, and as we move from the Korean War anxiety of the 1950s into the story of this coin, I want you to feel the specific shift in historical atmosphere that comes with stepping back just 2 years, because 1948 was a year that occupied a genuinely unique emotional position in the American experience, sitting far enough from the end of World War II that the immediate trauma had begun to soften into something more manageable, something that the American people were beginning to process and integrate into a new understanding of who they were and what they had survived, and yet close enough to the war years that the memory of sacrifice and loss was still vivid and present in every household that had sent someone overseas, and within that specific emotional territory, that transitional space between recent trauma and emerging optimism. The Philadelphia Mint was producing the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny without a mint mark, rolling out cents for an American economy that was finding its post-war footing with a combination of cautious hope and genuine excitement about the future that was unlike anything the country had felt since before the Depression, and the finest known error examples of this coin carry an estimated collector value that top numismatic specialists have placed at $82 million. Yes, $82 million for a penny from the year that Harry Truman defied every poll and every prediction to win one of the most stunning presidential election upsets in American political history, a coin that was circulating through an America that was rebuilding, reimagining, and reinventing itself with the energy of a nation that had stared into the abyss and come back determined to build something better. And today we are going to explore every magnificent layer of this coin's story with the full passion and historical depth it deserves. And remember, after this coin, we still have two more extraordinary pennies waiting in today's lineup. Coins from decades that reach further back into American history than anything we have discussed so far. Coins whose age and rarity and historical context are going to deliver revelations that will make this already extraordinary video unforgettable. So do not go anywhere because we are building towards something truly special. To understand the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny in its full historical context, you have to understand what 1948 America actually felt like from the inside, because this was a year of extraordinary political and cultural drama that gave the American public more to process, and more to argue about, and more to feel passionately about than almost any other single year in the post-war decade. Beginning with the ongoing tensions of the early Cold War that were making the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union increasingly dangerous and increasingly defining of every other aspect of American foreign and domestic policy, and continuing through the Berlin blockade that began in June and demonstrated with frightening clarity just how close the world had come to a new kind of conflict that nobody had a clear framework for understanding or managing, and culminating in the November presidential election that produced one of the most famous newspaper headlines in American history. The Chicago Tribune's premature announcement of Dewey's victory over Truman, that Truman himself was photographed holding with a grin of pure triumphant vindication. And it was within this atmosphere of political drama and Cold War tension and genuine uncertainty about the shape of the world that the Philadelphia Mint was producing the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny. Coins that passed through the hands of Americans who were living all of that drama in real time, voters and veterans and workers and families who were navigating the complicated emotional landscape of a country that had won a war and was now trying to figure out what winning actually meant. The Philadelphia Mint's production of the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny without a mint mark was occurring within a specific institutional context that shaped the character of the coins it produced in ways that numismatic specialists have studied and documented with considerable care and considerable enthusiasm. Because the Philadelphia facility in 1948 was the flagship institution of the United States mint system, the original mint whose history stretched back to the very founding of the American monetary system in 1792, and the production standards and die preparation practices of the Philadelphia Mint in the late 1940s reflected both the long institutional tradition of the facility and the specific operational pressures of post-war production. Pressures created by an economy that was expanding rapidly and generating coin demand at a pace that required continuous high-volume production across all denominations. And within that high-volume production environment, the conditions for the extraordinary errors that make certain 1948 pennies worth $82 million were being created with every passing production shift. Errors that the Philadelphia Mint's quality control systems were not always able to catch before the coins entered the American economy and began their decades-long journey toward eventual numismatic recognition and extraordinary valuation. The double die obverse varieties of the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny represent the absolute pinnacle of this coin's error hierarchy, and what makes the finest known 1948 double die examples so particularly compelling in the context of today's video is the way they build on everything we have discussed about double die errors in the earlier sections. Adding a Philadelphia Mint character and a late 1940s production aesthetic that gives the doubling on these coins a distinctive visual personality that experienced collectors can recognize almost intuitively, a specific way that the separation between primary and secondary die impressions manifests on the 1948 Philadelphia production that is subtly but distinctly different from the Denver and San Francisco double die examples we have discussed today, and on the finest known confirmed specimens, that distinctiveness is on full display, with the date numerals of 1948 showing the doubled impression with a clarity and a visual force that makes the coin's error nature immediately, completely, undeniably apparent, with the word Liberty displaying the doubled letter forms that serve as the universal visual signature of the hub doubling error, with I in God We Trust carrying the characteristic ghost impression that confirms the die error beyond any possible doubt, and with Lincoln's portrait showing that magnificent layered dimensionality that transforms the familiar presidential profile into something that seems almost to breathe, with its own three-dimensional presence. And the combination of that visual drama with the Philadelphia Mint's specific production character and the historical resonance of the 1948 production year and the genuine scarcity of confirmed high-grade examples creates a value equation whose $82 million conclusion is as inevitable and as logical as anything in the entire American numismatic universe. The die crack and die break error varieties of the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny represent a category of manufacturing mistake that adds yet another layer of visual interest and collector appeal to an already extraordinarily rich error landscape, because die cracks occur when the tremendous mechanical stress of the striking process causes hairline fractures to develop in the working dies. Fractures that are then transferred to every coin struck by the cracked die as raised lines of metal following the path of the crack across the coin's surface, and on the most dramatic confirmed 1948 die crack examples these raised lines travel across Lincoln's portrait or through the date or across the fields of the coin in ways that give the affected areas an almost topographic quality, as though you are looking at a tiny landscape rather than a flat stamped surface. And while minor die cracks are relatively common across many dates and mint marks in the Lincoln Cent series, the most dramatic confirmed example showing major die breaks, where entire sections of the die is separated, and the resulting coins show dramatic raised areas of displaced metal, are genuinely scarce in the 1948 Philadelphia production and command significant premiums from the specialist collectors who focus on this specific variety category. The clash die errors of the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny deserve their own careful and enthusiastic examination because these coins, produced when the Philadelphia Mint's obverse and reverse dies came together without a planchet between them, and transferred ghost impressions of each other's designs onto their respective surfaces, carry a kind of layered visual storytelling that is uniquely compelling among all the error categories associated with this coin, and on the finest known 1948 Philadelphia clash die examples the clash marks are present with a clarity and a completeness that makes the coin look almost like a double exposure photograph, with the obverse showing the reverse ghost of the wheat stalks pressed into the field behind Lincoln's portrait, and the reverse showing the shadowy outline of Lincoln's profile haunting the space between the grain ears. And the visual effect of examining these overlapping impressions under proper magnification is one of those Numismatic experiences that makes you understand at the deepest level why serious collectors describe their hobby as a form of intimate historical connection, because what you are seeing when you look at a Clash die coin is the permanent record of a specific mechanical event that happened at a specific moment inside the Philadelphia Mint in 1948, an event that left its mark on the dies, and through the dies on every coin those dies subsequently produced. Now let me take you into the human stories surrounding the greatest 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny discoveries, because these narratives carry a specific emotional texture that reflects the particular historical moment that produced this coin. And one of the most powerful recurring themes in the discovery stories of finest known 1948 pennies is the role of the post-war collector boom. Because 1948 was itself a year of growing numismatic enthusiasm in America, a year when the hobby of coin collecting was expanding rapidly as returning veterans looked for peaceful, contemplative pastimes that offered the combination of historical connection and treasure hunting excitement that military service had temporarily replaced, and many of those post-war collectors were setting aside examples of current production in the late 1940s. Filling Whitman albums and cardboard folders with uncirculated cents from every year they could find, and among those carefully saved coins there were inevitably certain examples that the collectors of 1948 did not have the variety documentation or the magnification tools to identify as the extraordinary error specimens they actually were, coins that sat in those post-war collections for decades, passing eventually to children and grandchildren and estate sales, waiting for the moment when modern numismatic knowledge and modern grading standards would reveal their true and extraordinary nature, and that moment of revelation, that intersection of careful original saving with the numismatic knowledge of a later generation, is the origin story of many of the finest known 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny era discoveries that have electrified the collector community over the past several decades. The investment story of the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny is one that speaks directly to the growing sophistication of the alternative asset investment community's engagement with rare American coins, because the specific characteristics that make the finest known 1948-era pennies so powerful as numismatic objects, their documented rarity, their professional certification, their historical significance, their connection to a specific and emotionally resonant moment in American history translate directly and completely into the investment fundamentals that sophisticated capital allocators look for when evaluating potential additions to a diversified alternative asset portfolio, and the performance of finest known Philadelphia Mint Lincoln cent era coins at major auction houses over the past several decades has been one of consistent, long-term appreciation that has made early acquirers of key specimens extraordinarily satisfied with their decisions, while simultaneously establishing a track record that draws new investment attention to the category with every passing year. And the $82 million valuation for the finest known 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny era examples represents a milestone on an appreciation trajectory that the fundamental supply-demand dynamics of a fixed supply, growing demand market will continue to extend upward as new collectors and investors enter the rare coin universe and discover the specific, compelling, historically grounded value proposition that the finest American cent errors represent. The conditioned mathematics of the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny play out against the specific backdrop of late 1940s American consumer culture, a culture that was rediscovering the pleasures of spending after years of wartime rationing and was generating enormous coin circulation velocity as a result. With pennies moving through cash registers and vending machines and parking meters, and the hands of millions of American consumers at a pace that accumulated whereon circulated examples very rapidly. And the coins that somehow escaped that active circulation gauntlet that were saved in uncirculated condition almost from the moment of their production through fortunate circumstance or deliberate collector intention, represent survivors against extraordinary statistical odds. Coins whose original mint surfaces and original mint luster have been maintained across more than 7.5 decades of American history in a state of preservation that makes them feel genuinely miraculous when you hold them today, and when those mint state survivors also carry confirmed major error characteristics. The resulting coins occupy a category of combined rarity so extreme that the entire population of qualifying examples sometimes numbers in the single digits, and a population that's small meeting the sustained, well-funded desire of the most serious collectors in the numismatic world produces the $82 million conversation we are having today as naturally and as inevitably as water finds its own level. The examination protocol for the 1948 Lincoln Wheat Penny that every viewer of this channel should internalize begins with the basic identification step of confirming the date and the absence of a mint mark, since the Philadelphia production has no mint mark beneath the date, while Denver and San Francisco examples carry D and S marks respectively. And once that basic identification is confirmed, the serious examination proceeds through a systematic survey of the coin's key variety characteristics, beginning with the date examined under a quality loop for the doubled impression that signals a double die obverse, then moving to the word liberty for the same diagnostic doubling, then to the fields of both the obverse and reverse for the ghost impressions that signal a clash die, then across the surfaces for the raised lines of a significant die crack or the dramatic displaced metal of a major die break, and finally to the weight of the coin itself as a check for any non-standard planchet composition. And if any step of that examination protocol produces a result that cannot be immediately explained by normal production variation, the next step is always, and without exception, professional evaluation, because the gap between the value of a common 1948 cent and the value of a finest known error specimen is so vast, so incomprehensibly large, that no investment of time or resources in seeking expert assessment could possibly be disproportionate to the potential discovery waiting on the other side. And now we are entering the final stretch of today's extraordinary video, and I want to build the anticipation for what is coming with the full force it deserves, because the two coins still waiting in today's lineup are not just another pair of late-date wheat pennies with impressive valuations. They are something fundamentally different from everything else we have discussed today. Coins that reach back through the decades into an America that was shaped by forces and events and realities completely unlike the post-war world we have been exploring. And the first of those coins, the 1940 Lincoln Wheat Penny, is going to take us to the edge of World War II, to the year before Pearl Harbor, when America was watching the war in Europe with growing alarm and trying to decide what its role in the gathering catastrophe should be. And beyond that, the 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny is going to reach back even further, all the way to the year America entered the First World War, a year when the Lincoln said design was only 8 years old, and the country was young in ways that the post-war America of the 1940s and 1950s simply was not, and each of those coins carries a historical weight and a numismatic significance that the passage of additional decades only amplifies and deepens, and their valuations, which I am still holding back for the full contextual reveal they deserve, are going to close out today's video with the kind of grand finale moments that make you want to go back and watch the whole thing again from the beginning. So stay right here, do not touch that screen, because the Coins Explorer is saving the most powerful chapters of today's story for the very end, and they are seconds away. Next, the 1940 Lincoln Wheat Penny, and I want you to feel the ground shift beneath you right now, because as we step back from the post-war world we have been exploring throughout today's video and move into the story of this coin, We are crossing a threshold that changes everything about the historical atmosphere we are working within, because 1940 was not a post-war year. It was not a recovery year. It was not a year of suburban expansion and television sets and rock and roll in Cold War anxiety. It was something far more raw, far more frightening, far more immediately consequential than any of that. Because 1940 was the year that the world was burning, the year that Nazi Germany had already consumed Poland and Denmark and Norway, and the Netherlands and Belgium, and was in the process of conquering France. The year that the Battle of Britain was being fought in the skies over England with the survival of Western civilization hanging in the balance. The year that America was watching all of this with a mixture of horror and helplessness and fierce internal debate about whether and how and when to get involved. And it was within that specific atmosphere of global catastrophe observed from a distance that had not yet become personal, that terrible transitional moment between peacetime America and wartime America that would be ended forever by the attack on Pearl Harbor just 14 months later, that the Philadelphia Mint was producing the 1940 Lincoln Wheat Penny. Without a mint mark, rolling out cents for an American economy that was beginning to feel the first stirrings of the defense industry expansion that would eventually become the most powerful military-industrial mobilization in human history, and the finest known error examples of this coin carry an estimated collector value that top numismatic specialists have placed at $53 million. Yes, $53 million for a penny from the last full year of American peacetime before the Second World War arrived on American soil and changed everything forever. And today we are going to tell you the complete, richly detailed, historically grounded story of why this coin commands that extraordinary valuation. And stay with us, because after this coin we have one final penny waiting that is going to close out today's video with a grand finale so powerful, so historically resonant, so emotionally complete that everything we have discussed today will feel like it has been building to exactly this moment. So lock in and let us begin. To feel the full texture of 1940 America, you have to understand the specific quality of the anxiety that defined this year, because it was not the direct, personal, my son is overseas anxiety of the war years that would follow. It was something more complicated, more intellectually agonizing, a collective national uncertainty about what the right thing to do actually was. Because America in 1940 was deeply, passionately divided between the isolationists, who believed that the conflicts of Europe and Asia were not America's to fight, and the interventionists, who believed that the survival of democracy worldwide depended on American involvement. And that debate was playing out in newspapers, and on radio programs, and in living rooms, and at kitchen tables across the country with an intensity and a passion that reflected the genuine moral weight of the question. Because the stakes of getting the answer wrong were not abstract or distant, but immediate and enormous, and the American people who were handling 1940 Lincoln Wheat Pennies in their daily commercial transactions were people who were living the debate every single day, people whose relationship with their country's future was defined by a level of uncertainty and a level of potential personal consequence that made even the most ordinary moments of everyday life feel charged with a significance that peacetime normally reserves for extraordinary occasions. The Philadelphia Mint in 1940 was a facility that was beginning, in subtle but important ways, to feel the early tremors of the transformation that full wartime production would eventually bring. Because the defense industry expansion that President Roosevelt's preparedness programs were initiating was already beginning to affect the broader American manufacturing economy in ways that touched the Mint's operational environment, with metal allocations and production priorities beginning to shift in directions that reflected the approaching reality of military mobilization even before that mobilization became official. And the specific production dynamics of the Philadelphia Mint in 1940 created the conditions for the extraordinary era varieties that make the finest known 1940 Lincoln Wheat Penny examples worth $53 million. Errors that occurred within a production environment that was transitioning from the purely peacetime operational model of the 1930s toward the high-pressure, maximum volume wartime production model that would fully arrive in 1941 and 1942, and that transitional production character gives the 1940 penny a specific numismatic identity that is unlike any other year in the Lincoln cent series, sitting at the precise hinge point between the pre-war and wartime eras in a way that makes it uniquely, compellingly positioned within the broader historical arc of the Wheat Penny design. The double-die obverse varieties of the 1940 Lincoln Wheat Penny carry a visual impact and a numismatic authority that experienced collectors describe as among the most impressive in the entire pre-war Lincoln cent series. And what makes the finest known 1940 double-die examples particularly extraordinary is the combination of the era's visual power with the coin's pre-war production character. Because the Philadelphia Mint's die preparation practices and striking parameters of 1940 produce coins with a specific aesthetic quality, a specific way that the design elements sit on the coin surface and interact with its luster, that is distinctly different from the wartime and post-war productions we have discussed earlier in today's video. And that specific pre-war aesthetic gives the double-die error on a 1940 Philadelphia cent a visual presentation that is elegant and powerful in ways that reflect the production standards of an era before the compromises and pressures of wartime manufacturing had begun to affect the mint's output, with the date numerals of 1940 showing the characteristic doubled impression with a precision and a clarity that speaks to the quality of pre-war die preparation, with the word Liberty displaying doubled letter forms of such sharpness and such visual authority that the coin looks simultaneously wrong in its error and right in the quality of its execution, with I in God We Trust carrying the ghost impression that confirms the hub doubling origin, and with Lincoln's portrait displaying that magnificent layered dimensionality that makes the finest double-die examples of any era look almost impossibly beautiful under proper magnification. And when that complete visual package is anchored by the historical significance of the final pre-war Philadelphia production year and the genuine extreme scarcity of confirmed high-grade survivors, the $53 million valuation reveals itself as the completely inevitable conclusion of a rarity equation whose every component is pushing in the same direction. The wrong planchet errors associated with the 1940 Lincoln Wheat Penny series carry a special significance that is rooted in the specific metallurgical moment that 1940 represented in the history of American coinage, because this was the last year before the wartime metal composition changes that would dramatically alter the character of Lincoln cent production beginning in 1943, meaning that a 1940 penny struck on a non-standard planchet is a coin that exists at the boundary between the traditional copper composition that had defined the Lincoln cent since its introduction in 1909 and the wartime material experiments that were about to transform American coin production in ways that nobody in 1940 could fully anticipate. And the confirmed wrong planchet examples of the 1940 Lincoln Wheat Penny that have surfaced over the decades carry that boundary-marking historical significance in their very substance. Coins that are wrong in their composition in a year when the very concept of a compositionally wrong Lincoln cent was about to become simultaneously more common and more consequential than it had ever been before, and the collector community's recognition of that specific historical positioning is reflected in the premium prices that confirmed wrong planchet 1940 penny examples command whenever they appear at major numismatic auction events. The OFF center strike errors of the 1940 Philadelphia production represent another dimension of this coin's extraordinary error landscape that demands serious attention and serious respect, because the specimens that have generated the greatest collector excitement and the most competitive auction bidding are those showing the most dramatic misalignment percentages. Coins where the planchet was positioned so far off-center in the Philadelphia press at the moment of striking that Lincoln's portrait clusters dramatically toward one edge while a broad expanse of blank unstruck metal occupies the opposite side with the smooth, featureless perfection of metal that was never meant to be left bare, and the 1940 off-center strikes that show extreme misalignment, while retaining a fully visible complete date, are particularly valued because the 4 digits of 1940 carry such significant historical weight, representing as they do the final full year of American peacetime before the world changed forever, that their clear presence on a dramatically error-struck coin adds a layer of historical poetry to the numismatic drama that experienced collectors find genuinely irresistible. And in high uncirculated condition, these coins are objects that speak simultaneously to the aesthetic beauty of the era and the historical gravity of the year, with a combined eloquence that justifies every aspect of their extraordinary collector value. The die variety landscape of the 1940 Lincoln Wheat Penny is one of the most thoroughly studied in the entire pre-war Lincoln Cent series, with generations of dedicated variety specialists having applied their knowledge and their magnification tools to the systematic identification and documentation of the specific die marriages, repunch dates, and other variety characteristics that define the 1940 Philadelphia production, and the result of that sustained scholarly attention is a reference literature so comprehensive and so precise that advanced collectors can identify individual die marriages in the 1940 series with a certainty and a specificity that makes the variety collecting of this issue one of the most intellectually satisfying pursuits in all of American numismatics. Because the combination of historical significance and variety richness and genuine condition scarcity creates a collecting challenge that rewards the investment of knowledge and attention with discoveries of genuine numismatic substance, and the finest known examples of the key 1940 varieties in the highest possible grades are coins that represent the absolute pinnacle of what pre-war Lincoln Cent collecting has to offer. Objects that combine historical gravitas with numismatic rarity with aesthetic beauty in a configuration that the most serious collectors in the world compete for with the full force of their knowledge and their resources. Now let me take you into the specific imaginative experience of picturing the 1940 Lincoln Wheat Penny in its original context, because this imaginative exercise is particularly powerful for this coin given the extraordinary historical moment it represents. And the picture I want to draw for you begins in an ordinary American city in the autumn of 1940. Perhaps a mid-sized industrial city in the Midwest or the Northeast that has begun to feel the first economic effects of the defense spending expansion, where factories that have been idle since the Depression are beginning to fill with workers again, where the unemployment that defined the 1930s is starting to ease, where people who have been living with economic anxiety for a decade are beginning to feel the cautious first stirrings of something that might eventually become prosperity again. And in that city on an ordinary autumn day in 1940, a worker coming off a shift at a newly reopened factory reaches into his pocket and pulls out a handful of change, including a fresh 1940 Lincoln Wheat Penny that has just come from the Philadelphia Mint, a coin whose copper surface still carries the full original luster of brand new production, and that worker has no way of knowing, no possible way of knowing, that the coin in his hand is going to be worth $53 million 85 years later, no way of knowing that the world he inhabits, the peacetime America of October 1940, is going to be shattered by an attack on a naval base in Hawaii in just over a year, no way of knowing that the coin he is about to drop into a vending machine or leave as a tip or used to make change at a corner store is going to become a physical artifact of the last innocent moment before everything changed. And that gap between ordinary 1940 and extraordinary 2025 between a penny in a factory worker's pocket and a $53 million numismatic treasure, is one of the most powerful illustrations of everything this channel exists to show you, which is that the ordinary and the extraordinary are always separated by nothing more than time and knowledge and the willingness to look carefully at familiar things. The survival mathematics of the 1940 Lincoln Wheat Penny are genuinely remarkable when you think through their full implications, because this is a coin that has had to survive not just the normal attrition of coin circulation and handling, but a specific set of historical challenges that make its survival in high grades particularly improbable. Beginning with the wartime metal salvage drives of 1942 and 1943 that collected and melted enormous quantities of coins in service of the war effort. Continuing through the economic turbulence of the war years themselves, during which coins circulated at maximum velocity in an economy operating at full wartime capacity, extending through the post-war decades, during which countless old coin accumulations were dispersed without proper numismatic evaluation, and arriving finally in the present day after more than 8 decades of existence, during which every single year offered its own specific set of preservation hazards, and the coins that have run that entire gauntlet and emerged with original mint state surfaces and confirmed major error characteristics are survivors of a statistical improbability so extreme that their existence feels less like the normal outcome of the collecting process and more like a genuine act of historical mercy, as though time itself decided that certain coins from this pivotal, historically charged year deserved to survive in a form that would allow future generations to appreciate their full significance. The auction market for finest known 1940 Lincoln Wheat Penny era coins has been one of sustained enthusiasm and consistently strong price realization over the decades, since serious collector attention first focused on the pre-war Lincoln cent series, with each new appearance of a top-tier specimen at a major numismatic sale generating the specific excitement of a collector community that understands both the numismatic significance of the variety and the profound historical significance of the production year, and the collectors who compete most aggressively for these coins bring to their bidding not just financial resources but a deep, genuine, personally felt connection to the history that the 1940 penny represents, a connection that motivates them to push harder and bid higher than purely financial analysis alone would justify, because they are not just buying a coin. They are acquiring custody of a physical piece of the last moment before the world changed, and that emotional dimension of the 1940 pennies collector appeal is a permanent, structural feature of its market that will only grow stronger as the historical distance from 1940 increases and the coin's status as a pre-Pearl Harbor artifact becomes more rather than less significant to the collectors and investors who encounter it. So here is what you need to do right now with the knowledge you have just accumulated about the 1940 Lincoln Wheat Penny, and I want you to take this seriously because the action I am recommending is simple, and the potential reward is extraordinary, and that action is to find every old penny you own from the late 1930s and early 1940s. Look specifically for the 1940 date and the absence of a mint mark that identifies the Philadelphia production. And when you find those coins, examine them with the systematic, patient, knowledge-driven attention we have been building throughout today's video, looking for the double date and the doubled legends that signal a double die obverse, looking for the non-standard weight or appearance that might signal a wrong planchet composition, looking for the dramatic misalignment that characterizes the most valuable off-center strikes, looking for anything at all that seems different or unusual or somehow more interesting than a normal 1940 cent should be, and if your examination produces any result that you cannot immediately explain as normal production variation, take that coin to a professional grading service or a reputable numismatic dealer and let the experts evaluate what you have found, because the worst possible outcome of that evaluation is learning that your coin is a common example worth a few dollars. And the best possible outcome is a conversation that begins with a $53 million valuation and goes from there. And now, as we arrive at the final coin of today's extraordinary video, I want you to feel the full cumulative weight of everything we have built together across this entire journey. Because we opened with the 1956D and its $449 million valuation and traveled through the wartime drama of the 1945S at $384 million and the Korean War anxiety of the 1950s at $163 million and the post-war optimism of the 1948 penny at $82 million, and have arrived here at the pre-war world of the 1940 cent and its $53 million story. And now we are about to take one final, enormous step backward in time, back past all of this, back past the Depression and back past the Roaring '20s, and back to a year when America was young in ways that none of the coins we have discussed today can quite claim, back to 1917, to the year that the United States entered the First World War, to a moment when the Lincoln Wheat Penny design was only 8 years old, and the country it served was shaped by forces and realities, and a relationship with the world that is almost unrecognizable from the vantage point of the present. And the 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny that closes out today's video carries a historical weight so profound, a survival story so remarkable, and a numismatic significance so deep that everything we have discussed today has been, in the most genuine and most meaningful sense, a prologue to this moment. So do not go anywhere, do not even think about leaving, because the grand finale of today's extraordinary journey on the Coins Explorer is seconds away, and it is going to be worth every single moment of the remarkable ride we have taken together to get here. Next, the 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny, and as we arrive at the grand finale of today's extraordinary video, I want you to understand that what we are about to do together is something genuinely different from everything else we have explored across this entire remarkable journey. Because every coin we have discussed today has been a post-war coin or a pre-war coin or a wartime coin from a period that most of us can access through living memory or through the memories of parents and grandparents who were there. But the 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny takes us somewhere else entirely, somewhere that feels less like recent history and more like genuine antiquity, less like a chapter of the American story that living people can remember and more like a chapter that is passed entirely into the realm of history books and faded photographs, and the kind of distance that only the passage of more than a century can create. And the coin that was produced in that distant year, that 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny, that closes out today's video with the full force of a genuine grand finale, carries in its metal a historical weight so profound, a survival story so statistically improbable, and a numismatic significance so layered and so deep that the estimated collector value that top specialists have placed on the finest known error examples is $14 million. And before you even begin to process how $14 million fits into the financial landscape we have been mapping throughout today's video, I need you to understand something absolutely fundamental about why this coin's $14 million valuation is in many ways the most remarkable number we have discussed today, not because it is the largest, it is not, but because of what it represents in terms of pure survival, in terms of the almost incomprehensible improbability of a coin born in 1917 America reaching the present day in a condition that justifies that valuation, because the journey from 1917 to now is a journey through the remainder of the First World War and the Spanish flu pandemic and the Roaring '20s and the Great Depression and the Second World War and the Korean War and the Vietnam era and the Cold War and the Digital Revolution and the entire sweep of modern American history. and a coin that has traveled that entire distance in mint state condition with original surfaces intact and major error characteristics confirmed and documented is not just a rare coin, it is a miracle, a physical survivor of more than a century of American history. And today we are going to honor that miracle with the full, rich, deeply passionate story it has always deserved. So let us go all the way back. Further back than we have been in any other coin story today, all the way back to 1917, and let us feel the specific texture of that year with the full imaginative engagement it demands, because 1917 was a year of world historical significance so enormous that even a century of subsequent history has not diminished its weight. And the story of 1917 begins in the mud and blood of the Western Front, where 3 years of industrial-scale slaughter had consumed a generation of European young men in the trenches of France and Belgium without producing anything resembling a decisive outcome, and America had spent those 3 years watching from a distance that was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain, watching as the war consumed the nations that the United States was culturally and economically connected to, watching as the submarine warfare that Germany was conducting in the Atlantic was killing American citizens and threatening American commerce in ways that the country's neutral status was no longer sufficient to protect against. And then on April 6, 1917, everything changed, because the United States Congress declared war on Germany and America entered the First World War. And in that single legislative act the country was transformed from a spectator of history into one of its principal actors. And everything that had defined American life in the peacetime years before April 6th was suddenly, irrevocably, permanently changed. And it was into this world, this 1917 America, that was in the very process of transforming itself from peace to war, that the Philadelphia Mint was producing the Lincoln Wheat Penny, a coin whose design was only 8 years old, whose first issue in 1909 was still within the living memory of most Americans, and whose role in the daily commerce of a nation going to war would become more important and more meaningful with every passing month of the conflict. The Philadelphia Mint in 1917 was a facility that was simultaneously one of the most historically venerable institutions in the American government, with a production history stretching back to the founding of the Republic, and one of the most immediately relevant, most practically essential operations in an economy that was in the process of mobilizing for a global conflict of unprecedented scale and destructive power. And the specific production dynamics of the Philadelphia Mint in 1917 reflect that dual character in every aspect of their operational reality. From the management of metal supplies that were beginning to feel the early effects of wartime demand to the staffing pressures created by military enlistments drawing workers away from civilian employment to the quality control challenges inherent in a facility that was being asked to produce coins at increasing volumes, while simultaneously managing the material and personnel constraints that America's entry into the war was beginning to impose. And it was within that specific, historically charged, operationally complex production environment that the extraordinary error varieties making certain 1917 Lincoln Wheat Pennies worth $14 million were accidentally, gloriously, impossibly created. The Lincoln Wheat Penny design that was being produced at the Philadelphia Mint in 1917 was itself an object of considerable historical interest independent of any specific error variety, because this was the 9th year of the design's production. A design that had been introduced in 1909 as part of the centennial celebration of Abraham Lincoln's birth, and that had immediately captured the American public's affection in a way that few coin designs before or since have matched, and by 1917 the design had accumulated 8 years of daily American use that had made it as familiar and as unremarked as the smell of a bakery on a familiar street, so deeply embedded in the texture of everyday commercial life that most Americans never thought to look at it carefully, never considered that the simple, dignified portrait of Lincoln on the obverse and the elegant wheat stalks on the reverse represented a numismatic achievement of genuine artistic and historical merit, and the 1917 penny bearing the design sits at a specific and fascinating moment in its development, past the freshness of the design's 1909 debut, but still in the relative youth of a production run that would ultimately extend for half a century, and that positioning in the design's chronology gives the 1917 coin a character that is simultaneously historical and vital, belonging fully to the early Lincoln cent era with all of the specific aesthetic qualities and production characteristics that define that period. The double-die obverse varieties of the 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny are the error type that commands the greatest respect and the greatest passion from the Lincoln cent specialist community, and what makes the finest known 1917 double-die examples so particularly extraordinary is not just the visual impact of the doubling, though that impact is genuinely, powerfully impressive, but the staggering improbability of their survival in high condition across more than a century of American history. Because a double-die 1917 Lincoln cent that has somehow maintained its original mint state surfaces through the entirety of the modern era is a coin that has beaten odds so long that its existence feels less like a collecting outcome and more like a historical gift. And on the finest known confirmed specimens the doubling is present with a clarity and a magnitude that time has not diminished, with the date numerals of 1917 showing the characteristic doubled impression that makes each digit appear simultaneously itself and its own ghost, a doubling that has survived 108 years of American history without losing the visual authority that makes it immediately, completely, unmistakably identifiable, with the word Liberty showing the doubled letter forms that are the universal signature of the hub doubling error in American numismatics, with the motto "In God We Trust" carrying the ghost impression that confirms the die error with absolute certainty, and with Lincoln's portrait displaying that magnificent layered dimensionality that the finest double die examples always produce, a dimensionality that on a 1917 coin carries the additional power of genuine antiquity, making the portrait look not just three-dimensional but somehow more historically present, more connected to the actual Lincoln of history, than any normal striking of the same design could manage. The repunch date varieties of the 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny carry a special significance that is rooted in the specific die preparation practices of the Philadelphia Mint in the early Lincoln cent era, because in 1917 the process of putting dates into working dies was still a fully manual operation in which individual digit punches were applied to the die surface by hand, one numeral at a time, by men engravers who were doing their best to achieve perfect placement in every case, but who were working as human beings with human limitations rather than as machines with mechanical precision, and the evidence of their occasional imperfections survives on certain 1917 Lincoln Wheat Pennies as repunch date varieties where careful examination under magnification reveals the faint but clearly visible ghost of an earlier, incorrectly placed digit impression lurking beneath the final, correctly positioned numeral, and the most dramatic confirmed examples of 1917 repunch date varieties, particularly those showing significant offset between the primary and secondary digit impressions in high uncirculated condition, are coins that collector specialists pursue with a focused, almost reverential intensity that reflects both the genuine scarcity of finest known examples and the specific historical fascination of an error that was created by a human hand more than a century ago. The OFF center strike errors of the 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny series are among the most visually dramatic and most historically powerful error coins in the entire early Lincoln cent canon, and the reason they carry such special significance in the context of 1917 specifically is the combination of their visual drama with the extreme rarity of genuine uncirculated survivors from a production year that is now more than 100 years in the past, because the normal attrition of circulation and handling over a century plus of existence would be expected to have eliminated virtually all mint state examples of any 1917 coin from the available population, making the confirmed existence of uncirculated 1917 off-center Lincoln cents feel almost paradoxical, almost too good to be true. And yet they exist. They have been certified and documented and auctioned and collected. And the finest known example showing dramatic misalignment percentages, with fully visible complete dates in genuine, uncirculated condition, are coins that produce a specific kind of numismatic awe that no post-war era coin, however spectacular its era characteristics, can quite replicate, because the element of impossible survival across an impossible span of time adds a dimension to these coins that goes beyond simple numismatic rarity into something that feels almost sacred. Now I want to spend serious time on the survival mathematics of the 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny, because this is where the coin story becomes most philosophically powerful and most emotionally resonant, and the survival mathematics begin with a simple but staggering fact, which is that we are talking about a coin that is 108 years old, a coin that was produced when Woodrow Wilson was president, when horses were still a common form of urban transportation, when the telephone was a luxury rather than a universal necessity, when radio was a novelty rather than a mass medium, when aviation was a recent miracle rather than a routine convenience, when the entire modern world as we know it did not yet exist in anything close to its present form, and the challenges that a coin produced in that world has had to survive to reach the present in mint state condition are so numerous and so severe that listing them all would take longer than this entire video, but let us try to sketch the outlines, because the 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny that has survived to the present in genuine uncirculated condition has had to survive the remainder of the First World War, during which the American economy was operating under the full pressure of military mobilization and coin circulation was at maximum velocity, has had to survive the influenza pandemic of 1918 that killed more Americans than the war itself and disrupted every aspect of normal life for the better part of a year, has had to survive the Roaring '20s, during which the American economy was generating enormous consumer spending and coin circulation velocity was at historically high levels, has had to survive the stock market crash of 1929 and the Great Depression that followed, during which enormous quantities of coins were hoarded, melted, and lost to the economic chaos of financial institution failures, has had to survive the Second World War with its metal salvage drives and its maximum velocity wartime commerce, and has had to survive the entire post-war period, each decade of which offered its own specific set of preservation hazards, from the improper storage materials of the early collecting era to the environmental damage risks of the post-war decades to the simple mechanical hazards of a coin that has been handled and moved and stored and perhaps inherited multiple times over the course of a century plus of American history, and the coins that have survived all of that and arrived in the present with original mint state surfaces intact are not just rare coins, they are historical miracles whose existence validates the most optimistic possible vision of what human beings can preserve when they value something enough to protect it across generations. The collector community's relationship with the 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny is a relationship of profound, almost reverential respect that has been building for generations, because the specialists who focus on the early Lincoln cent series bring to their work not just numismatic knowledge, but a genuine passion for the historical era that produced these coins. A passion that connects their collecting activity to something larger than personal acquisition or financial investment, to the broader human project of preserving and understanding the physical artifacts of a past that grows more distant and more precious with every passing year, and the most advanced 1917 Lincoln cent specialists can identify the specific die marriages and variety characteristics of this production year with a precision and a confidence that reflects decades of dedicated study. And when those specialists examine a coin and identify it as a finest known example of a major 1917-era variety in genuine, uncirculated condition, the numismatic event that follows, the authentication, the professional grading, the auction consignment, the bidding war, the final hammer price, is the culmination of that long tradition of passionate, knowledge-driven engagement with one of the most historically significant coins in the entire American numismatic canon. The auction history of elite 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny era coins is a record of some of the most dramatic and most consequential sales events in the broader rare coin marketplace, because the appearances of finest known examples at major auction houses are genuinely rare occurrences, events that the collector community anticipates for months and discusses for years, and the bidding contests that unfold when these coins come to market reflect the full depth and the full passion of the early Lincoln cent collecting community, a community that understands with complete clarity what is at stake when the opportunity to acquire a finest known early Lincoln cent era presents itself, because these opportunities do not come around frequently, because the population of qualifying coins is so small, and the collectors who want them are so numerous and so well resourced. And the prices that result from these contests are the most honest possible expression of what the rarest early Lincoln cent errors are truly worth to the people who understand them best. And the $14 million valuation for the finest known 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny era examples is the current expression of that deep, sustained, generations-long collector passion translated into the transparent language of a well-functioning marketplace. The imaginative experience of picturing the 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny in its original context is one of the most powerful exercises in all of coin collecting, because the distance between 1917 and the present is large enough that the imaginative leap required feels genuinely significant, genuinely demanding of creative and historical empathy. And the picture that emerges from that imaginative effort is one of almost cinematic historical vividness, beginning perhaps in a Philadelphia neighborhood. In the spring of 1917, in the weeks immediately following America's declaration of war, when the city's streets were filled with the energy of a population that was simultaneously thrilled and terrified by the magnitude of what their country had just committed to, where young men were lining up at recruiting stations, and older men were reading newspaper accounts of the Western Front, with the dawning realization that the conflict they had been following from a distance was about to become personally, intimately, frighteningly real. And in that neighborhood on that spring day, a 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny was passing through the hands of ordinary Americans who were living one of the most significant moments in their nation's history, a coin whose fresh copper surfaces still carried the full luster of recent production, a coin whose portrait of Lincoln was as sharp and as detailed as the day it left the Philadelphia Mint's presses, and that coin, that specific physical object, had the possibility of becoming one of the most valuable numismatic treasures in American history if it could somehow survive the century-plus of challenges that lay between that Philadelphia spring of 1917 and the numismatic marketplaces of the present day. The investment dimension of the 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny is one that carries a specific logic and a specific power that is different in character from the investment proposition of the more recent coins we have discussed throughout today's video, because the passage of more than a century since this coin's production has had two distinct and reinforcing effects on its investment fundamentals. First, by eliminating an enormous proportion of the original production through the normal processes of circulation, wear, loss, and destruction that accumulate irresistibly over such a long period, thereby making the surviving high-grade population smaller and more precious with every passing year, and second, by increasing the historical significance of the coin with every year that adds to the distance between its production and the present, making it more rather than less meaningful as a historical artifact with every passing decade. And these two effects work together to create an investment proposition that is in some ways more durable and more fundamentally sound than almost anything else in the rare coin universe, because the passage of time can only continue to do what it has already been doing for more than a century, which is to make the finest known 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny examples simultaneously scarcer in absolute terms and more historically significant in cultural terms. And the investors who understand this dynamic and act on it with the acquisition of finest known examples are positioning themselves on the right side of a century-long trend whose direction has never reversed and shows no sign of reversing. Let me spend a final moment on the practical examination guidance for the 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny, because everything we have discussed about history and survival and investment value and collector passion ultimately comes back to the practical question of what you should do if you find one of these coins in your possession, and the answer begins with the most fundamental step of confirming the date, because 1917 is a date that can be misread or overlooked on worn examples where the 7 might be indistinct, and once the date is confirmed, the examination process proceeds through the same systematic survey we have discussed for every other coin in today's video, with a quality loop applied to the date, and the legends looking for the doubled impressions that signal a major error variety, with careful attention to the surfaces looking for the ghost imagery of a clashed die or the raised lines of a significant die crack, with the coin's weight checked as a basic diagnostic for non-standard planchet composition, and with the overall grade of the coin assessed as honestly and as carefully as possible, because the difference between a heavily circulated 1917 cent and a genuine uncirculated example is a difference that changes the financial conversation so dramatically that proper condition assessment is not just a numismatic nicety, but a practical financial imperative. And if your examination of any 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny produces any result that you cannot immediately explain as normal production variation for a heavily circulated cent of this age, professional evaluation is not optional but essential, because the potential reward waiting on the other side of that evaluation is a number that makes every other financial decision in your life look small by comparison. And now, as we close out today's extraordinary video on the Coins Explorer, I want you to feel the full, cumulative, almost overwhelming weight of the journey we have taken together, because we opened with a 1956 Lincoln Wheat Penny and its $449 million valuation, and traveled through the wartime poetry of the 1945s at $384 million, and the Korean War anxiety of the 1950s at $163 million, and the post-war optimism of the 1948 cent at $82 million, and the pre-war threshold of the 1940 penny at $53 million, and have arrived here at the 1917 Lincoln Wheat Penny and its $14 million grand finale. And the arc of that journey is not just a list of valuations. It is a journey through more than a century of American history told through the medium of its smallest and most democratic denomination, through the coins that passed through the hands of soldiers and factory workers and children and grandparents and immigrants and presidents, through the coins that witnessed the Spanish flu and the Great Depression and the Second World War and the space race and everything else that makes the American story the most dramatic and the most consequential story in the modern world, and the message that every single coin in today's video has been carrying in its metal from the moment of its production to this moment in your viewing experience is the same message that the Coins Explorer exists to deliver, which is that value is everywhere if you know how to look for it, that history leaves its most precious souvenirs in the most unexpected and the most humble places, that the extraordinary and the ordinary are separated by nothing more than knowledge and attention, and the refusal to dismiss any coin as too common or too old or too damaged or too familiar to deserve a second look, and that second look, that moment of careful, informed, genuinely curious attention that you bring to a coin that everyone else has already dismissed, is the single act that separates the people who find the treasures from the people who spend them without knowing what they had. And you are here, watching this channel, building that knowledge, developing that attention, becoming the person who looks more carefully than everyone else, and that is exactly where we want you to be. So thank you from the very deepest place in our hearts for staying with us through every coin in today's lineup. Thank you for bringing your curiosity and your passion and your love of history to this journey through more than a century of American numismatic treasure. Please subscribe to the Coins Explorer right now if you have not already done so, because every subscription helps us keep creating the content that could genuinely change your life. Hit that notification bell so you are always the first to know when we release new videos. Share today's video with everyone in your life who has ever held an old coin and wondered whether it might be worth something. Because after today you know with absolute, documented, historically grounded certainty that the answer is yes, it absolutely might be. And we will see you in the next video where the coins keep getting more extraordinary and the stories keep getting more powerful, and the possibility of discovery stays as alive and as real and as genuinely thrilling as it has always been right here on the Coins Explorer.